What can retiring and exiting veterinarians do for themselves for self-care?
It really is a traumatic event. And I say this because I went through it myself 6 months ago. I was successful in finding a private.
Good day. My name is Dr. Bonnie Bragdon. I'm your host today of the Veterinary Insider, the podcast for veterinarians who want to keep veterinary medicine independent and veterinarian owned. The Veterinary Insider is powered by IVPA. Check us out at iveterinarians.org. The IVPA is the only association dedicating to meet the needs of veterinary owners and those who want to own. So my favorite benefit for IVPA is the teleradiology. Independent veterinary radiologists serving independent veterinary clinicians. And my guest today is Dr. Mark Helfat. So Mark, I'm really excited to talk to you, but let's start with what inspired you to become a veterinarian. So why on God's green earth did you become a veterinarian?
Wow. Well, obviously I don't have to say I love animals, so I won't say it. But early in life, it just became a passion, especially when you consider that my father was a lawyer, and that propelled me to search for another profession real fast. Fortunately, my brother became a lawyer, so that satisfied the need in the household. But as I went through my secondary education and all, I started working in veterinary practices, and eventually ended up on a dairy farm for 4 summers, and that was all I had to do. It just changed my whole life. I didn't want to be a dairy farmer, that's for sure, but I would spend days with the local veterinarian in New Hampshire where the farm was, and it just turned out to be the most incredibly, propelling force that set me on my way here. And it was just a miracle that I got into Cornell. I mean, I couldn't believe it when the letter arrived. And it really set up the rest of my whole life. I don't know how many people can say that.
So what's your favorite thing about being a veterinarian? When you look back over your career, like what is the most fun that you have had?
It would come down to enjoying getting out of bed every morning and going to what was basically my second family. It's always been an independently owned practice wherever I worked and wherever I owned. I owned 2 practices in my lifetime. And it was just that, working with the staff and, of course, the clients and the pets. And I did a lot of large animal for 25 years. And that's totally different to go out on a farm and deal with an individual's total income and reliability upon what you come up with. It's really economics, and it's a satisfying, fulfilling career, whether you're at large animal or small animal. Of course, the small animal's totally different. It's sentiment and feelings and emotions and family. It's quite a profession if you can do both sides of it in terms of large animal and small animal, and it's very gratifying.
Well, Dr. Mark, stories like yours and your lengthy career are why we started the Independent Veterinary Practitioners Association. It's those stories of relationships, serving the needs of both companion animals as well as those whose livelihood is dependent on their livestock. And so I am really interested, as I'm sure our listeners are, what do you think about the corporatization of veterinary medicine? Lay it on us. No holds barred. What do you think?
Well, it all starts, to work in reverse. If you go online and bring up the article I wrote for VIN a number of years ago, Saving the Soul of Veterinary Medicine, it's really all spelled out there. But it really, I don't want to make the corporatization of veterinary medicine evil, but it really goes against everything that I looked for as a career. And by that, as the article goes on to say, we're losing that family type practice where you could come into my practice, the independent practice, today, and you could come in 2 years, and you would see the same employees, the same receptionists, the same veterinarians, the same technicians, everything. There was no turnover to speak of, and it's a comfortable feeling. Second of all, it's a happy feeling. The staff worked together as a community. I was the only one overseeing the operation, and it was truly, a very community kind of thing. I mean, and we knew each other at work. I mean, we experienced each other's family issues, personal issues, and that makes such a difference in veterinary medicine. It's a warm feeling, and that's just one small part of it. But there's no private equity looking over your shoulder, and in fact, if you're not reaching their goals, the fear of cutbacks or whatever would happen in that respect, or even the nature of how you practice, we're not going to order that drug or this drug. And I think it really reflects the general picture of our profession in terms of everything you read in the journals, and that is the degree of unhappiness. And you couldn't have picked a better time to bring this up, because the AVMA just released in August what they call their chart of the month. It comes out of their economics division, and that most recent chart was a degree of happiness in the profession. And there again, go on avma.org, you can pull this up. Basically what it says is about a third of the profession is very satisfied with the career they chose. The other 2/3, if you look at the chart, not so satisfied, or in fact very dissatisfied. And what does this come from? And I really have to point towards corporatization. I really do, because that's been the major change in our profession over the last 10, 15 years. I have to point to it. I think it sticks out like a sore thumb. And, I think with this comes an incredible amount of stress, an incredible amount of frustration on, the part of the veterinary technicians, veterinarians themselves. It goes across the board. So it's not a good situation.
You've talked about a lot to unpack here. So first, I would encourage all of our listeners to check out your original story, Saving the Veterinary Profession on VIN. We'll provide that link. It's a very heartfelt, detailed opinion piece that is very, very inspirational. I want to address one issue, and this may be a little bit of a trick question, Dr. Mark, but what do you think corporates get right that independents need to copy? What is it that has attracted us to working for corporate practices? Why do associates go work for those corporate practices? And what does the veterinary profession need to embrace about that model that we need to just copy and compete against?
Well, I mean, I won't deny that a corporate practice comes with many benefits that may not be found in the independent practice, and that being very flexible hours, which certainly are important, because our veterinarians are raising families, have to take time off, and when they do come back to work, they need specific hours. I would say the pay must be on a higher scale at the corporate level, going right to a signing bonus, that kind of thing. The benefits probably, I don't know for sure, but the benefits are probably more extensive than in the independent practice, simply because it's a large group that can offer group plans and that kind of technique. But in terms of anything else, I would say I don't know. I would debate this question, because everything in our profession is not just economics. I mean, we really, you know, I don't know how many people have turned down jobs just, that gave you more money and everything else, but that you could see through it that the money wasn't everything. So, in terms of the benefits, I would say they're mostly financial, and that's a good question. What do you want in life? You know, and that brings up the point of why our young veterinarians in particular have this unhappiness, and that's because I think they've lost the dream that I had graduating from school. And now, it was a different time, it was a different era, but 95% of my class wanted to own a practice, and that was our dream, and it stayed with us our whole career till the day we eventually sold the practice. That dream is no longer there, and for many reasons. But that dream kept everyone going. And then when you own that practice, it was a whole new world, a good world, something you really look forward to.
We are now in this gig economy where young people have discovered all these fabulous ways to use technology and really work together to have that flexible lifestyle. And so I would argue that ownership, which is what we're going to talk about, we're going to dig into that. Ownership of your practice actually gives you that autonomy that you're looking for, the flexibility. You can choose your lifestyle. In this day and age, there are more urgent care facilities, there are more critical care facilities. And so I really think that there's a huge opportunity for new veterinarians to really define how practice should be. I think practice is going to change.
Oh, yeah. I mean, practice has always been changing, especially in the small animal. And the large animal, I sometimes that's what I appreciated about large animal is that it didn't change. But in small animal, yeah, I think change goes with it inherently. And I think you have to be prepared for change, mostly technology, that kind of thing. But I would agree with you.
So the AVMA came out with another interesting point recently through their economic research, and I'm not going to get it right, maybe but at their recent economic summit, I want to say they're projecting that there really is going to be maybe an oversaturation, that really we're going to have too many veterinarians graduating here in the near future, maybe the next 10 plus years. And what do you think is going to happen with salaries at corporate practice once we have more veterinarians than jobs? Do you even think that's true? What do you think about that?
I tend to agree because I lived through this already in the 2010 era. It was a recession, so certainly that contributed to it. But with 13 schools in the pipeline at this time, and Lord knows how many added each year, I don't see the need for veterinarians increasing much further than what it is now in the small animal field. I think COVID pretty much capped as busy a practice can be. And I think we're in a downhill decline. And I think there are statistics to indicate that while pet owners are spending more money on their pets, it's not necessarily the veterinarian that's seeing that money. And in fact, no, there's been a 2 or 3% decline over the last year or two. So to answer your question, yes, I think we will have either the right number or an oversupply. And how is corporate medicine going to react to this? Well, I think it's obvious. If there's a practice that hires 25 veterinarians, there's going to be some layoffs. There's going to be some reduction in benefits, whatever, or they'll close the practice. And in fact, it's not unusual for a corporation to have closed practices. Right here in New Jersey, I could think of 3 or 4 right off the bat that have closed their practices in the last 5 years. I can't give you specific reasons, but I would say it's definitely a possibility if the profession becomes oversaturated, and it's no doubt going to happen. I think one of the problems that our profession is going to face is the number of hours that veterinarians work, they may cut back on them. So, that might even it out a little, but it's hard to say. A lot of this is conjecture.
Well, we know veterinary visits are down. So while revenue is increasing, visits are down, which means it's increasing because prices are increasing. And that's definitely not sustainable. And I agree with you that corporate structures mean there's more infrastructure that has to be supported, more large leadership salaries that need to be supported. And so it's not all doom and gloom though, right? Like, not all doom and gloom, because you have a really good solution. I really would encourage everybody. I want to hear more about your activities with practice transitions. Can you give us the exact web address? And I'd really like to hear more about what you're doing to help veterinarians own.
Right. For about the last 5-6 years, I founded a nonprofit, Veterinary Practice Transition.com. And it really was for practitioners such as myself, a solo practitioner. I had a couple associates, but it was a solo owned practice. And I was aging out. And every day I said to myself, what am I going to do with this practice? And the problems I faced, which many veterinarians, the baby boomers in particular, do, is your associates have no interest in owning a practice. They're for many reasons, but they don't. You can't turn to your associate and start grooming them to buy your practice. So, who am I going to find? And it became a challenge. And there was really, it was interesting, but there are practice brokers. We all see their ads. They have no interest. They have no interest in these solo practices. They want a practice that's well above $1 million gross. So I'm talking $1.5 million probably. So the brokers are out of the picture. And when I saw this, and advertising is a dead end, I said, what can be done to facilitate the sale of a practice? So I started this nonprofit, which is basically a website. You go on, you sign up for just an incredibly minimal fee, $95. You describe your practice, you take photos. It's basically a listing, contact numbers, some economic figures for your practice, a lot of paragraphs. What does this practice, what makes this practice different than any other? Where might there be improvements? And boom, you're on the website. And I get calls from both sides. I get calls from the practice owners that want to join it, and I get calls from young veterinarians that are interested in how it works. Now, some of the finer details of this nonprofit are I have set up some guidelines for the practice owner to encourage him or her to attract a buyer. And it's basically personal loans. In other words, yes, the prospective buyer can go to a bank and get a standard, mortgage loan to buy a practice, but that may not work. So it may not be attractive enough for the seller to get that owner to come through. So I have stipulated that you should consider a private loan and a lower interest rate than the bank and a minimal down payment. And when you add all these three things on paper, it may be a risk. There may be a risk. But the way I look at it is it's either this or you close the doors. I mean, there is no in between. So sit down, and before you go to bed, think about this. Do I want to sell this practice, or do I want to close the doors? And I think we're a faithful, trustworthy community, and I don't see people, young buyers, reneging on this deal. It's not mandatory, but the nonprofit's been set up to really encourage this. And I unfortunately get calls on a weekly basis from solo veterinarians. They have health problems, they have other problems, family issues, or they're simply tired. And how am I going to sell this practice? And as sad as it is, I get calls from practitioners that just say, you know what, I'll do your website and all that, but I think I'm just going to end up closing the doors. And that's a terrible loss.
So it's a real loss for communities. When I founded IVPA a number of years ago, I was traveling all over the place, all over the Southeast, and I saw how impactful veterinary practices were to especially small communities. The practice was a source of jobs rather than just working at Dollar General or Walmart. It was an opportunity to have a professional career that was enjoyable and professional, and it gave you a long time career. For the veterinarian, they became an integral part of the community. To me, and our logo actually is column. It's a important part of the community, right? And so those veterinary practices are important, whether they're in rural communities or large communities. So for our listeners who may be new to the idea of buying and selling practices, those associates who may just be exploring this, practices come in multiple sizes. Large, those tend to go to corporate buyers. Middle, those might go to, a medium size or maybe a group of veterinarians. And then what Dr. Helfat is talking about here is that smaller, single doctor, solo practitioner that maybe in a less populated community, and that community still needs services, and it's an exciting place to practice and to be. So, Dr. Helfat, one of the things that you mentioned in your article, Saving the Veterinary Profession, was the concept of a NOLO practice. So help us understand what a NOLO practice is, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, it's a term that I don't even know who came up with it. And in fact, I sometimes tried to check the spelling of it, and it comes in 2 or 3 different spellings as well. No low, no load. I mean, it's crazy, but it still is all the same. These are practices, and I will right off the bat tell you these are thriving practices that on the books, they just don't look very healthy. At the end of the year, there's a negligible profit in the profit margin. And basically because the owner of the practice paid him or herself real well. He or she paid the staff real well. All the bills are paid, and there's no money left over. This is not what a corporation's really looking for. They're looking for a fair amount of money, being rolled over every year, and making the books look good. That being said, these are practices, and I mentioned this in the article, Saving the Soul of Veterinary Medicine. These are practices that put children through college. These are practices that paid for a house. These are practices where the staff was well paid. These are practices where there was happiness everywhere. These were thriving practices, yet they're called NOLO because the paperwork just doesn't match up to EBITDA and all the things that go into evaluating a practice these days. And I think they are referred to in a form of a derogatory sense. But at the end of the day, my practice was right there as a NOLO practice. But, I did well. I don't know how to say this. And anyone that bought my practice would from day one reap the same benefits. So that's the term for it's better or for worse. And I really hate the term, but we're stuck with it.
Yeah, and NOLO, again, referring to no or low profit. And the barrier, or maybe even the myth, and where you come in to help, is that the practice cannot support alone, right? So a broker comes in or a banker comes in and they just shake their head and they say, no matter how I do this math, the practice profit that's left over is not going to pay for the debt service or the loan payment every month. But what I'm hearing from you is that can be overcome. So tell me again, dig into a little more detail about what you advise new owners, right? What would you advise an associate veterinarian? What kind of questions should that veterinarian ask if they're looking at a NOLO practice and they're considering buying it? How do they know if it's good and solid or not?
I think number one, they'd have to bring in their accountant to go over the books real carefully and see where the money comes and goes. Second of all, I would definitely say that the prospective buyer, believe it or not, and I've been in touch with banks. They are eager to loan money to these practices, and I've questioned these bankers over and over, and there's actually one on the nonprofit's website that advertises, and they do take a look at what's going into this practice, and for the most part, they are more than agreeable to loan the money. However, I would say that for a prospective buyer to take a look at these practices, go over the books for the last 5 years and see if there's anything that sticks out for your accountant that would raise a red flag. But I would say in veterinary medicine, these practices have been very healthy. And if the practice has been there for 15 years, there may be one or two obstacles that the new buyer has to face. One is the practice hasn't been kept up to date, and that's going to take some money. You're going to have to bring in a new digital x-ray, ultrasound. You're going to maybe have to do some physical work on the building, things like this. But I think you can borrow money for this, or you can work it out with the owner and lower the price. Which brings me to something I haven't even mentioned, and it is apropos to what you're asking. The asking price for these practices, these so-called NOLO practices, if I were going to buy a practice, I'm a young veterinarian, I'm looking at a low ball figure, a really low ball figure. And here's the deal. The practice owner is going to be more than eager to exit this practice. And, a lower figure than anticipated may very well work in these cases. So you get a lower figure that you have to buy out for, and you use the extra money to upgrade the building, the equipment. It all breaks out even. And in this day and age, some of this equipment you won't even have to pay for. These big labs that we deal with, IDEX, Antec, etc., they actually will provide you some of this equipment. So it's a pretty good deal. I don't see too many. I mean, yes, get your accountant in here. Let's see if there are family members on the payroll, things like that. That may not be such a great idea. But look at it this way. If there are family members on the payroll, that's money in your pocket. You're not paying them anymore when you buy the place. So you may see this. Or you may see money going out to extensive charities, things like this. This is more money for you. So, you have to work with this with your accountant. But if that practice is 15, 20 years old, I have a real good feeling about it. And I think most of these practices on my website, they're 30, 40 years old.
Yeah, so I love the idea that we're preserving history and we're able to bring it forward into a new generation. I think that's really exciting. I would ask our listeners to check us out at iveterinarians.org, as well as subscribe and follow us. We've had a number of experts on our series here that'll help new owners as well as current owners navigate these waters. To Dr. Mark's point, there are actually banks willing to lend you money. We talked to First Financial Bank about their programs and how the SBA loans now take into account and allow sellers to finance part of that purchase price. There are other banks, Dr. Mark, to your point, that actually will consider a NOLO practice that's being purchased as a new startup. So they'll kind of start you from scratch and roll you over and help finance that. So Dr. Mark is absolutely right. There are lending institutions that love veterinarians because we generally don't go out of business and we pay our bills. And so there's lots and lots of opportunities. Maybe a little overwhelming, maybe a bit of an emotional roller coaster, but absolutely worth looking into. So for your owners who are looking to exit, what's the first step to working with you? I know we've had a little bit of hopelessness, if you will, but what's the first step to working with vet practice transitions and how do they approach that?
Well, I think the most common question or comment I get is, well, let me think about, selling this practice. I'm happy that I talked to you, this kind of thing. And that's the wrong attitude. I tell every one of these prospective practice owners that are thinking about selling, start tomorrow, start yesterday. It takes a while to attract a buyer. So that's number one. Whatever you're going to do to try to sell this practice, why don't you plan on it being a 1 or 2 year down the road process if you start it today? Do not wait. The problem also is that most of these solo vets have issues. They're older, family things, who knows what. They want to relocate, grandchildren, and all this. These are kind of emergencies. I mean, I think you got to get on the bandwagon. And number two, I think you have to get, if there is any way to upgrade the machinery and upgrade the practice itself, fix this wall that looks like it's caving in. I mean, these are important things if someone comes and looks at your practice. And number three, go over your finances with your accountant and your lawyer and see what you can do to really make everything look the best it can, legally. But I think, there is a certain amount of preparation, but a lot of it is emotion. You have to put your heart into selling this practice. And my first word of advice to every veterinarian that wants to sell that practice is to get the word out. I mean, they're so cautious, this community of sellers. I don't want my clients to know that I'm trying to sell the practice. I mean, that's the wrong attitude. I mean, your clients are looking at you as you go from 65 to 70. And the number one question in their mind is, this individual is going to be selling this practice, so why keep it a secret? Get the word out. I mean, in my community, I am surrounded by 3 practices. They each hire in the neighborhood of 50 to 70 veterinarians. I have to imagine some of these younger veterinarians are kind of frustrated in that atmosphere. And you get the word out, and one of these veterinarians out of 50 or 70 will give you a phone call, want to eat lunch or something, and just kind of sniff out what's going on. So that's my word of advice. Do not delay. Get the word out. If you go to a local vet meeting or one of those dinners where a bunch of you get together, stand up and let it out. Just get the word out. It's not, if you keep it a secret, who's going to buy your practice?
And one additional word of advice, I am an industry veterinarian. I work with distributors and sales reps, and they like to talk. They're constantly talking. And as a matter of fact, Patterson Veterinary Supply has a great program to help associates buy practices. And so talk to your distributor rep, talk to your manufacturer's reps, go to associations, have those conversations. But you make a great point, which is the sale of a practice can be a very emotional, situation. And we've had lots of guests on here to talk about all the mechanics and the finances of buying and selling practices. But tell me a little bit more about how a veterinarian who's getting ready to sell or exit, how can they deal with that emotion? Like, what do they need to do to take care of themselves? We talk so much about new veterinarians and self-care. What can retiring and exiting veterinarians do for themselves for self-care?
It really is a traumatic event. And I say this because I went through it myself 6 months ago. I was successful in finding a private buyer. I did this for 47 years. And the next morning, it's done. Now, some veterinarians still want to work. So that's number one. I think you would find that the buyer would be more than happy to keep you on for a certain amount of time because the transition is important. There has to be some kind of stability. So if you're one of those vets that doesn't want to just stop and exit goodbye, you can probably negotiate easily a 6 month, a 1 year kind of schedule so that it's not so traumatic. But for that veterinarian that decides this is it, I have found that these are happy individuals. they they don't experience any kind of PTS or whatever SD. They enjoy sleeping in that next morning that the practice is sold. So there's and I have just about my whole class from school, the look on their face is one of it didn't come a minute too soon. So it's really not at the top of my list for worrying about the mental state of the veterinarian that sells the practice. And if this veterinarian wants to hang on, God bless you. Just keep working a very part-time schedule. The only caveat here is don't get in the way. The new owner has ideas. The new owner is going to start doing things that might turn your stomach. Just keep your mouth shut. Now, if the new owner is more of a person such as myself that looks for advice, that looks for conversation on changes, oh God, speak up. Tell them what you've done. There's nothing like experience. There's nothing like mentoring. And to tell an individual, I already tried that, it didn't work. That's great, but you have to have the proper relationship. And it used to be an associate. So it used to be so easy. You sold your place to an associate. They knew exactly how you think, and they got a million changes they want to make. But for the most part, in the old days, at least, they understood where you were coming from. So it works both ways.
So if you're an owner getting ready to exit, please reach out to Dr. Mark Helfat and find him on Veterinary Practice Transition. Great program. I love your website, Dr. Mark. It's actually pretty straightforward and easy to understand. But now I want to hear more. What would your advice be to that new owner? They've just they just signed the closing papers. The ink's not even dry on the paper. They got the keys to the practice. How do they approach that first day as a new owner?
Well, that's a good point. And I would say that stability is important. I wouldn't go making radical changes, changing the hours, and certainly, getting rid of staff. These are no-nos. I think I would run that practice for at least 6 months, the same exact way the previous owner had been running it. Then after 6 months, you can start to make your changes. But that's not to say you can't start upgrading things and changing protocols. And I will say right off the bat, there is no question in my mind that those prices are going to have to change. That would be the change number one that I would recommend. I see these practices, and one of the reasons they're not showing a great profit at the end of the year is they're not charging them enough. I mean, I think a new owner either knows right off the bat what percentage to raise everything, or just find a buddy in the next town and kind of get an idea what the going rate is. But in my case, I would say, that office visit probably will go up a fair amount right off the bat. Will your clients complain? I doubt it. As long as the service is good and they know it's not any cheaper down the block, I don't think they'll complain. Now, here's something we have not discussed, and that is the difference between buying a practice from another owner, a practice that's up and running, or starting your own practice. And I might be biased on this for sure. I cannot understand why you would start up a brand new practice when within a mile or two is a practice that's been going for a good number of years. My reasoning here is you can pick any statistic you want. You open a brand new practice, it's going to take you 2 years to start breaking even. You buy that practice that's a mile or two down the road from another independent veterinarian, solo owned. He or she has about 5,000 records sitting on the shelf of active clients. You have guaranteed income from day one. You have money rolling in. You have no worries. So my advice is, rather than think about setting up that brand new practice of your own, just buy that practice that's been up for sale. It comes with staff as well, and it comes with veterinarians as well. I mean, you cannot get a better deal. So we didn't touch on that, and it may be off the subject, but it's just a pet peeve I have.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about buying a practice and especially a small solo practice, please reach out to Dr. Mark Helfat at Veterinary Practice Transition. If you're a new owner, maybe looking for advice, wanting to work with a consultant, we've got lots and lots of great guests that have joined us over the last few months. And so please check us out on our channels, and you can find more information about all of that on iveterinarians.org. Well, Dr. Mark, can you share a success story with us? I really would love to hear something that's really hopeful and inspiring. Do you have anything that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I wrote a book. For a number of years, I worked as a volunteer for AVMA. I was on their board of directors, and I eventually was the board chair, and it all came to an end. And it felt like I had lost a piece of my heart, because all those years, it was about 18 years with AVMA, it was contributing to the profession, making bold decisions with a group of people and all that, and it came to an end. So I sat down and I said, what could I really do to continue this type of, I guess I'd call it mentoring, without, an organization. So I wrote a book called The Happy Veterinarian. It's on Amazon. I think you have to pull it up by going to Happy Veterinarian Mark Helfat. And I wrote down about 18 chapters that I had lived through in terms of practicing veterinary medicine. That would be tips. Each chapter is a tip. And I gave a story. I gave a story with each sort of moral that I came up with. And it's a quick read, probably 2 breakfasts will get you through it. And that's my success story of all the things I've done. But at the end of that book, I felt like I had passed on like 30, 40 years of practice to anyone that wants to reap the benefit of a guy that's already lived it. And I think that's how I would answer your question.
Well, we hope our listeners will check out your book on Amazon, The Happy Veterinarian. In addition to that, I think, Dr. Helfat, you've also made a really good point that research actually supports that veterinarians are happier when they're part of an association. So first, I want to thank you for all your years of service with the AVMA. I know all of us in a little bit younger generations have reaped the benefits of that. But again, join the AVMA, join your state association. If you're looking to own or you're already owned, we'd love to have you at iveterinarians.org and join the IVPA. And that sense of camaraderie and connectedness, it helps us all. And not just listening to a podcast, but actually reaching out and having a relationship with somebody.
I agree. And anyone who wants to get in touch with me, I would truly enjoy spending the time getting back to you.
All right, one last question. We're wrapping this up, but it's a really key, important question to me. I'm getting of an age where I'm thinking about my legacy and how the profession is going to continue. And I am worried that there will not be enough veterinarians in leadership roles in the profession or who own their practice. So what advice do you have for a veterinarian who is an associate and is unhappy and maybe doesn't want to own? Like, what would you tell somebody who says, no, I can't own?
Well, I mean, I guess the first question is, do you want to own? But if the question is no, I don't really want to go down that road, but I'm still very unhappy. I think, I would seriously question what you're unhappy about. And this also comes under the title of mentoring, but it may be that clinical practice just isn't what you want. Now, the good news is our profession offers so many avenues with that DVM degree. And so, maybe start looking around. Do you want to work for, a pharmaceutical? Do you want to work for the government? Do you want to teach? Oh my Lord, is there a shortage of veterinary teachers these days? I mean, there's other avenues you can do. Now, if you want to continue clinical practice, you got to really seriously ask yourself, am I at the right place? I think there are good jobs and there are not so good jobs. Is it the staff that's got you upset? Whatever. But I think you have to ask yourself some really serious questions to return to a state of happiness. And yeah, I mean, ownership is not for everyone, but I think finding the right employer can sometimes, especially that first year or two out of school, or really those first 5 years out of school, if you have a choice between a practice that pays top dollar and a practice that is below top dollar, but the owner and the staff, you're going to learn a lot there. You're going to have a lot of guidance. Go with that one. And that can make a world of difference for the rest of your career.
Well, I'm so excited we had this conversation with you, Dr. Helfat. I'm really looking forward to all the great advice that people are going to hear from this podcast. So follow us, subscribe, listen to our podcast, learn more about us at iveterinarians.org. Dr. Mark Helfat, you can find him all over the place. His book, The Happy Veterinarian, on Amazon. Find his brokerage service at veterinarypracticetransition.com, and really encourage everybody in the profession to take a look at his editorial piece on VIN, which is open to the public. And with that, thank you so much, Dr. Helfat, for your advice and your time today.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's been fun.